So this is part of a series of Hades streams where I'm doing 32 heat, boonless, and mirrorless. Mirrorless kind of self-explanatory, no mirror. Boonless just means that if I get a boon at any point in the run, I cannot use it and I have to sell it when I can. It's one in a series of 6. I did every weapon. This had been done once before by Nana, which inspired me to do this. She did it once with the rail with Hestia. And so I wanted to use a different rail aspect and also use all 5 other weapons because I thought it would be really fun and interesting, right? To be the first person to do it and also just to showcase the different weapons. I just thought this is a really neat challenge. It's a little different than like speedrunning, for instance. The footage here is from a little while back. I recorded these all in February and March, I believe. And then I was super duper sick, which is unfortunate. I was a bit under the weather. So I don't remember exactly every single thing I did, which will make it fun for me to watch. And also the guests haven't seen it ever before. So it'll be super fun for everybody to watch. With that being said, I think we're going to hop into this one. I'm going to start the little death here that proves that we're unseated. And then we can just kind of talk about things, right? Whitefire, what are you thinking about this run specifically? You got any thoughts on the Lucifer rail? Anything special?
No, I don't really have anything special to say about it. I guess being that Nyanya already did it with Hestia, Lucifer, I don't know if it would have been my first choice personally, but it's certainly an interesting choice.
Yeah, I do. So it wasn't necessarily intentional to do the most different rail possible from Hestia, the one that had already been done, but it is kind of fun to do a hidden aspect, right? It's very different. I feel like it's not going to be similar at all to, well, it's not going to be similar at all to Nana's run for a lot of reasons. You know, like us being different people, different play styles, different mirrors, or not mirrors, different packs. But yeah, the Lucifer rail in and of itself is just very different. What,
Definitely. I would have said the quote unquote obvious choice probably would have been Eris, because you do get the damage buff from the special, but I don't know if the damage buff is enough to offset not having any boons. But I haven't tried it, so I couldn't say.
Yeah. You know, maybe I will try it at some point. Do the thing I was looking, pro strats, no death PR times. Well, you're going to get all 3 of those things in regards to me doing 32 heat with a rail. But yeah, what's your experience with the Lucifer rail actually? What do you think about it? Just using it yourself, just outside of, you know, this challenge in particular.
I think it's okay. It's an interesting aspect. I don't think it's my favorite rail aspect. But it's fun. It's one of those things where I don't think it's terribly effective, but I do think it's fun. If you've ever done the meme run of Super Soaker, that's a lot of fun, where you take the Poseidon attack on your attack, and then you try to get Sea Storm and just go all in on everything that boosts your attack, and you just push everything around with a little fire hose. It's a lot of fun.
It sounds like a lot of fun. No, I am actually glad that you used that word. Yeah, fun is a very extreme word, a very elaborate word. I'm glad you used that one. No, but I do think that Lucifer is very fun, right? I don't know, it might be my favorite rail aspect. It feels good to shoot a fire beam at people, right? I don't know. I think it's very fun.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And then, as we can see here, we have the Pact on the screen. I cover the Pact in every one of these runs. I'm going to give it a quick rundown here as well. I do use the same Pact for every run. And fun fact, I forgot to change the Pact command. But the thing is, it's the same other than the picture on the left. So you'll see a different weapon over there in the corner, but it's the same Pact. But yeah, the bottom of the screen there, approval process and tight deadline, they're a little covered up on my webcam. I do not have either of those turned on, which is one of the 3 things for my Pact, right? I kind of think of it in 3 things, which is 1, no tight deadline strategies for me, right? I don't like being rushed. I don't practice speed running. I like doing crazy, silly, difficult challenges that don't relate to going fast. So that's why that's not there. The second point kind of ties directly into that, which is that I try to take things that could potentially make things longer, but not necessarily more difficult, including like giving enemies more health or, you know, the ability to tank a hit, or having more enemies, things like that. Although I guess more enemies is in theory more difficult, right? And then there's a lot of things that change the enemies that I don't necessarily, to me at least, I don't think of them as more difficult. I just think of them as different. So that's fun. And then the final thing for me with this Pact is just making the final boss fight as regular as possible, doing things that don't necessarily change it very much. However, I know you've seen this pact, and we've talked about this in the past, but I'm still curious what you think about this, because I think we had a conversation where you mentioned before that you don't necessarily think a damage control route would be the best play for the rail in particular.
I don't know if I did say that, but I would actually be surprised if it was me that said that. Damage control is a very easy choice for the rail because it hits fast, so you're stripping those damage protection hearts off real quick. If you're doing something slower, like Arthur um, or the bow to some extent. I mean, the bow depends on the aspect you're using. Rama can deal with damage control fine, but the regular ones maybe not so much. But for the rail, like any rail aspect, really, damage control is not a big issue. As far as the rest of the pact, I know we've talked about this on the first one you did with the bow. But for the most part, if you're doing what you're saying, like you don't want tight deadline, there's nothing really wrong with any of these choices. Obviously, they work for your play style. Yeah, I don't have too much to add there.
Sure. I'm kind of glad that I said the silly thing there and got it backwards. Yes, I believe that you said to me exactly what you just said now, which is that the rail does work with damage control. Same with like the fist, because they get like a lot of fast hits on.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
I just kind of got that backwards in my mind. But yeah, so this is the pact. You can do ! Pact if you want to see this at any point. If it's on YouTube, I'll put it in the description. But let's hop into the run, right?
I'm asking for it.
So for anybody who's not, because part of the reason that I wanted to do these runs is because I think it's good for beginners to learn how the weapons work, because I'm not relying on boons or builds as fun as they can be. So I think it's a good point right here in the beginning to talk about what the Lucifer rail kind of does. It, as you can see there, it has a special which puts out things that stay in place and do repeated hits, which is nice. And then they can also explode if you put too many out, or if you shoot them, or even if the enemies damage them, you don't have to shoot. If they take damage, or you try to put a fourth one out, then the first one you put out will explode, because there can only be 3 at a time. And then the standard attack is a super cool laser beam, fire beam, flamethrower. It's a beam. It's pretty cool, and it ramps up damage as you go.
Yeah, I don't think they ever say exactly what the beam is, but yeah, it's some kind of projected energy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think the game in-game refers to it as like Hellfire, so that clarifies things entirely, right? That tells you exactly what it is.
Oh, sure, yeah. It's right there on the screen. Igneous Eden Hellfire.
Which actually,
Actually,
yeah,
the Hellfire is the special.
I think we came to the realization at the exact same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, it's not important.
So with,
So
go ahead.
I don't know what you're gonna pick here, but I'm gonna say this is my guess, right? If I was playing, I would say Piercing Fire would probably be my first choice for specifically the challenge that you're doing, because you're going to get that bonus damage to the armor. You're going to be able to hit more than one foe at a time, which is very important with the rail, because that's a big limitation of the rail compared to other weapons, is that you don't have any splash or piercing effect with your main attack. So Piercing Fire will give you that to an extent. Greater Inferno, it's okay. Like I could see you maybe making an argument for it, but probably not going to be what I would choose. An Eternal Chamber is only really good if you have boons, because it takes away the damage ramping, which is very important if that's your only source of damage. So I'm curious what you're going to take, but I'm hoping it's Piercing Fire.
My first thought when I look at this here is that I think that a lot of the things that you can get for Lucifer are good, which is cool. It's not like something pops up and you're like, all right, definitely not that one. You just move on to the next one. In my experience as somebody who was playing this, I didn't go into this with set, for Lucifer specifically, I didn't go into this with set Daedalus hammers in mind whatsoever. I was just like, I'm just going to use Lucifer and I'll take what I get and I'll make it work. The one that I do ultimately take here is going to be Greater Inferno. So I'm glad that you said I could make a case for it, because, you just laid out the groundwork for me to make a case for it. What I like about the Hellfire specifically is the fact that you have 3 of them, but in essence, it kind of functions like the Zeus shield when you throw it and it reaches its peak. It's something that stays in place that you can not have to interact with. You can be completely away from it and enemies can get hurt by it. So
Passive damage.
Yeah, passive damage and also screen coverage, right? Like they'll take hit stun from that as well. They don't take hit stun from any standard or from the standard attack as is. So I increased the radius on that to further sealing what I just said. The fact that enemies are more likely, if you just put it in like the middle of a small area or whatever, they don't really have a way to avoid it, you know? But I wasn't super duper excited about any of those options, but also didn't hate them. I think what I will say about the bottom one, the one that gives you infinite ammo, is that of the 3 options that I had, it's the only one that also comes with a drawback. So where, like you said, you think I can make a case for the middle one and that you would have chose the top one, I think that kind of just sells the fact that, again, the bottom one is the only one that has a negative effect.
Yeah, even in standard runs, unless you're doing a kind of meme run like I was talking about earlier with Super Soaker, picking Eternal Chamber on the Lucifer rail doesn't really benefit you as much as it might sound like it does, because so much of the damage output of its attack is from that damage ramping, that when you lose it, just being able to not having to reload doesn't really offset the damage that you gain, or not the damage, the time you save by not having to reload.
Yeah, I will say, like, what you're saying makes a lot of sense from like a DPS perspective. But when I was playing normal runs in this game using any of the rails, it does feel nice to have infinite ammo, right? Running out of ammo and having to reload
feels nice. Absolutely.
Is the worst. I just want to pause here.
But, like, you're not going to have any boons that are proccing. Like, you're not going to have lightning or anything on it that's shooting off something actually doing damage. So it doesn't really make sense in a boonless run to take it. Yeah,
unless you just wanted to have your boonless run take as much time as possible. You know, if that was your goal,
it
could definitely assist with that, right? Take as much attention and focus for an extended period of time. That's always fun, right? I said that mostly sarcastically, but again, anybody who's familiar with my playstyle for these kind of runs, not entirely not relevant. But I paused right here specifically to showcase kind of what I was talking about a moment ago, is I can just set these in the middle, and a lot of enemies in this game have to come to you and usually follow directly to you. And so these little grabby hands that I definitely know the name of, they don't really have a choice but to go towards these. And then in addition to that, also just showcasing the other thing I said, where if you put a 4th one out, they're going to explode, but if they take damage, they explode. But the explosion of one of them counts as damaging the other ones. So basically I can make 4 big explosions by shooting another one where these already are, and that's kind of how I do the bulk of the damage to finish this run.
Yeah, so the interesting thing actually about the ringers, and I'm sure you've noticed this over the course of your playing, but it's something that they were programmed for balance reasons. Only one will ever aggro on you at a time. So even though you had 2 on the screen there, only one will actively be going after you to try and attack you. Because it was in early access when they were first introduced, they could really kind of overwhelm the player with constantly stun locking you with its grab animation. It wasn't a fun time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like you said, that's something that I kind of noticed as I was playing, but not something that I could have directly elaborated to somebody else. With my build as it is right now, with the 1 hammer that I have, and I say build, the build's only going to change from hammers or me getting health as a resource, or Charon Wells. But yeah, with the weapon that I have right now, and the fact that I can use all my weapons, because all my attacks other than cast, because I don't have boons picked up, other than getting an enemy specifically trapped in a big explosion of the special attacks, my attack is my best damage output. It's just that it has no protection. It locks you in place and it doesn't hit stun people. But when you have an opportunity to, that's how I get my most damage out. So that's kind of my mindset at this point in the run, is like use the special as the primary way of doing things, but if there's an enemy that you can get damage out on, use the attack. Yeah,
I kind of figured that's what you were going to be doing as soon as you took the Greater Inferno. I will note something though. It's I'm stumbling over my words here. Based on something you just said, where you said it locks you in place when you attack, you actually can dash while continuing to fire the rail.
That's
so
definitely
if you
true,
need mobility, you're not actually physically stuck in place. Like, sure, you can't walk, but you can dash and continue to fire and not break your ramping.
Yep. I don't think that becomes too relevant to this run specifically, but that is a good point to make. Especially, again, for if anybody's watching this, just to kind of get an understanding of how the weapon works. And that's something that I did take advantage of a lot in like regular runs using the Lucifer rail. Because like I said, I think the Lucifer rail is fun. Especially because me personally, you know, just to stop talking necessarily about strategy all the time, just kind of bring some opinions onto it. I think the rail may be my least favorite weapon in the game in general.
Like, I can understand how you would feel that way, yeah. It definitely plays the most different to all the other weapons. It's the only one with a resource-based attack, essentially, with ammo. Um, so you have to kind of play with that in mind. It also is the only one that doesn't automatically provide hit stun.
Yep.
It doesn't do any piercing. So like, there's a whole bunch of things that make it just feel a lot different to the other weapons. And that is actually a big reason why a lot of people bounce off of it the first however many times they might try it. But once you kind of understand how to use the rail, like whether it's the Lucifer aspect or just any of the rail aspects, it can be a lot of fun and they can be pretty effective, but it probably has a higher learning curve than any of the other weapons, I would say.
Sure. Yeah, I think everything you just said is a good way of summarizing everything, even like for me specifically, because I know you listed a couple different things about it compared to other weapons, but the hit stun was really like the big thing for me, which is something I've talked about and probably will talk about a million times in this run. Something else I want to make a note of real quick. I'm just kind of putting these out here in the middle of the room. But one thing that I do like about weapons in this game, like select weapons, is things that you can like preemptively plan for enemies while they're spawning. Not every weapon can really do that, you know?
Yeah, it's pretty much just the rail. You can do it a little bit with the spear, like if you set out use a spear special to set your spear out on the map and then kind of line it up with where the enemies are spawning in. You can recall it and hit the enemies that way. But aside from that, and maybe the Zeus aspect, there's not really much else you can do with the other weapons to preemptively attack.
It's funny you say that because my thought was with the spear, but just the fact that you can get a full charge in on your spin if you want.
You can do that too, yeah.
Especially because if you don't know exactly where they're going to stand, this isn't relevant to this run, but for anybody who wants to use a spear, you can dash and do your spin attack. So like you won't do it in the place that you started. It's similar to how Hades himself does it.
Okay, and that's actually really the best way to do the spin attack with the spear. Just because it's a lot safer. You can charge it at a safer distance. It's getting a full charge or even a partial charge in close proximity to an enemy. It's not going to be a fun time.
So I believe, yeah, it's funny because in the moment you definitely know, but I guess with me pausing and talking and everything, I keep forgetting when I'm in a room like this. I was like, all right, what was my strategy to take out these enemies? Why are there so many? And I'm like, oh, it's a timed room. So for anybody who doesn't know,
yeah, this is actually kind of bad luck on enemy spawns for this particular survival room.
and I was just gonna,
Because it's a small room with a lot of enemies.
I was just gonna throw in for anybody who doesn't know, I don't like doing tight deadline as I established earlier with the Pact, but if you were, you wouldn't have these rooms. So just a thing to consider, something that might be interesting. And then we get this part of the game, the most tense.
Starting off with a regular catch.
But I think the thing is, I intentionally went for a regular catch so that you can get a hell fish to go with my hell fire, right? I wouldn't want to get something. I wouldn't want to get the special fish of the area.
That was your strategy the whole time?
Yeah, look, I said I don't remember all of this gameplay, but you remember the important things.
Yeah, yeah.
So more on to the fighting topic. This was not a good...
Fighting in this
There's
game?
fighting in this game. This was not a good draw for this weapon, this run specifically.
Honestly, the sneak is never a good draw for any weapon. Like, let's be real. If in the hierarchy of Tartarus mini bosses, the sneak is by far the biggest hassle to deal with, and there are strategies to deal with it, involving timing and summons.
I think it's interesting. Well, I wonder, is what you're saying at all relevant to speedrunning? Because I think that's an interesting thing that you just said. Because I would not have necessarily thought
for sure it's relevant to speedrunning.
Well, I'm saying, like, is the opinion coming from like the mindset of speedrunning?
I wouldn't say it's coming from strictly from a speedrunning aspect, because regardless of if you're speedrunning or not, the sneak is generally going to be the hardest one to deal with, in my opinion. Because like the Doomstone and the Skeleton Twins are all pretty standard. Like it's just a matter of doing damage.
I was just gonna say.
Whereas the sneak is more situational awareness and timing and avoidance.
So
that the other ones just don't really have going for them.
I love having Whitefire on as a guest because he's a pretty cool guy, right? I think that's relevant here. But in addition to that, I think it's good to have variance and opinions on like strategies and things in this game, because I haven't put too much thought into Tartarus mini bosses specifically, and I promise I'm not just a contrarian on every topic. But I feel like the Shadow Sneak is one of my favorite to draw in general, because especially if you're doing higher heat things and if you have middle management on, I can get hit by a stray attack from the bomb twins. which would be 4 of them with middle management. Or with the laser guy, if you don't necessarily have damage output in that at this point in your run in Tartarus, you can get hit by a stray laser between him and one of his skeletons that he saws. Sends out cells? What am I even saying? If you're not positioned perfectly. Versus the Shadow Sneak, the Ringers, I think you referred to them as earlier, they're just not... They're too slow. And they're just never going to get my attention, even with 1 dash. I think I've versed the Sneak multiple times during this series specifically, and I've never had a problem with them. And then the Sneak himself is also very predictable and very open for damage. It's just slow, which goes to my general gameplay, right? Like, you have to wait him out and counter him. You can't make the fight go faster. But, like, his attacks are not hard to avoid, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And like I said, there is a way, if you know the timing and positioning and everything, that you can just kind of burst it out from the start with a summon. But, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely good to have different opinions.
So this here is a beautiful, wonderful example of why I didn't need to pause to talk about things earlier, because I could not have a better showcase of putting things in the middle of the arena and just letting them do their thing. Especially with this draw, I got like all enemies that kind of had to chase me. And I used the laser a little bit there to like get it to go faster. I actually worried myself for a second because that laser looked really red because of the shading. And I was like, do I have Ares on the razor? Razor? Laser. But anyway, that was a fun little Erebus one.
The new Ares razor for the closest shave.
Yeah, I mean, you can model it after his little sword he's holding. Wait, exactly. I think we're on to something.
I mean, he's already got the whole, blades motif in Hades with the blade dash
and he also has a well-shaven side of his head.
Exactly.
With that being said, I'm doing a very similar thing in this run. So if you do like watching Hellfire slowly chip away at enemies, we're here for you.
The nice thing is that it does do reasonably good damage. Like, you're getting, 100 damage per pulse?
Yeah, with the Daedalus hammer, yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty good. Like, as far as boonless damage goes, to be able to just sit there and hit an AoE for 100 damage apiece every, I don't know how often it ticks, like maybe every 3 to 4 times a second, something like that.
Yeah, I think it ticks slower than like the Zeus shield, for example, but yeah, I definitely still agree with what you're saying. It's good damage.
Why not?
But one other thing that I will add is I mentioned earlier that you can hit stun people with that, and if you just put out the one single one, it's not really going to do a good job of doing that. But if you can get 3 placed close to each other, you can definitely, I think probably with 2 you could, but with 3 you can definitely get people hit stun locked for 300 a pop and they can't move, right? The majority of enemies. Not saying every single one, but yeah. So that's kind of what I was thinking when I was like, yeah, it has hit stun, which is very relevant. Obviously with the one single attack, they're just going to walk through it and get to the other side.
Yeah, so here we can see that you're facing your future wife, Tisiphone.
Ooh, we don't need context there, I think it was...
No, we don't need context at all.
But no, actually, I think Tisiphone is a good draw with this weapon because, I mean, all the sisters to a degree do this, but she does do a lot of standing in place and a lot of not having another threat while she's standing in place. Obviously, she has her sisters helping her for this fight, but there's no traps and there's no summons. And she does a lot of attacks, like I said, where she just stands in place. So it's very convenient.
The arena itself also helps you with the Greater Inferno because
Correct,
it's going to keep on getting smaller, which means that it's going to just be easier and easier for Tisiphone to be hit by the Hellfire.
So I have teased all of my guests during this run about how people like to point out when I get hit in this because all of my guests that I've had for this series, this Hades series, were under the assumption that I've never gotten hit while playing Hades ever and that I'm the greatest. But with that being said, if you are going to get hit by attacks, I feel like prioritization, just like it is with the enemies, is relevant here. Like, she hit me with that stun attack, but that does 3 damage, and the reason I got hit is because I wanted to get more damage out on her, and I feel like that's a fine trade. Especially getting health back after this fight.
Yeah, and it's better than being hit by her projectiles, which I think do like 5 or 10 or something.
So not having hit stun here is a bit unfortunate. Thankfully, I was able to end that attack pretty quickly. She is standing in place, which is good for this weapon. But yeah, for anybody who struggles with her projectile where she sends out a bunch of little ones in that spiral pattern, just remember that you can destroy that projectile along with a lot of other projectiles in this game by just attacking. So I think even with the spear I did that. Well, actually I had Electra with the spear, but it was a similar concept where she was sending out projectiles and I just stab and you just stand in their line of fire and attack.
Hope she won't be back anytime soon.
But yeah, we were able to save the summon here, so no worries. Wasn't really a threat on health. We're going to get full health back. So, I mean, I said Tisiphone was a good draw, and you just kind of have to execute. And thankfully that went pretty well, because we've seen times where it has not.
Yeah, no, that was pretty smooth.
I was going to say, I was actually looking at my air quotes build. I am on stream. I guess I could literally do air quotes. I'm not going to, though. It's air quotes build. And I was like 120 health coming out of Tartarus. That's not terrible, but it's not amazing, right? You started with 50, so you made 70 throughout, and that includes the 5 from the boss that's guaranteed. But then I looked at my money, and I was like, that I'm doing pretty good on, right? And money late in a run like this doesn't become really a problem because you make a bunch. But having it early and knowing that you can afford like any Centaur Heart coming up or any good thing that you would want from a well coming up, that's pretty comforting.
Up we go.
The Eris room giving you 200 definitely helped your money situation.
Welcome in, Jim. Not quite. Not quite.
Hey, Jib. AirPods build.
Made it to Asphodel.
So for some reason, and White, I don't know if there's any legitimacy to this, but I think you should be able to clarify that there's probably not and that I don't know what I'm talking about. But I feel like Hermes in particular has a way higher chance of spawning as the first room reward in freaking Asphodel. He just always wants to be there for me.
No, that's actually true.
Is it?
He has a really good chance of showing up in Asphodel. There's a very, very small chance that you can see him in Tartarus under certain conditions, but I think maybe only in the shop. I'm not sure if he'll ever actually show up as a room, but no, he's scripted to be kind of a higher priority in Asphodel.
That's very interesting. Do you know the logic behind that?
Not really. No.
Fair enough.
I don't know what the reasoning behind that is. It's just that that's where he's scripted to kind of be introduced, is Asphodel. So it's sort of similar to the way hammers are handled, where you'll typically, this isn't always the case, but you'll typically be offered a hammer in Tartarus, and then your second hammer either in Asphodel or Elysium, or if you're extremely unlucky or just skipped it, you might get it in Styx. That is something that actually changed a little bit over the course of early access, where the hammers could show up. They definitely tweaked that a little bit, and there was even a time where you could get 3 hammers, which didn't last too long.
I will say a couple things of note here. These enemies specifically, Whitefire will definitely tell me the name in a moment. I don't know it. I say this every time.
Skull Crushers?
Yeah, Skull Crushers. I say this every time they show up, but they're just my favorite punching bag. By far. I don't know why I like defeating them so much. They're just like...
They're a fun design. They definitely went through a lot of tweaking too in the early access period. They weren't a starter enemy. By that I mean when the game was first released into early access, they didn't exist. And yeah, they definitely went through iterations having to do with their timing and their the size of their AOE and like where the safe zones in it were, because it's not actually a circle. Like you might think it's a circle, but there's actually like it's weird. It has to do with the isometric aspect of it, but
So
yeah, they went through a lot of tweaking.
So I backed up here a little bit just to showcase, like we've talked about different strategies. This was really fun for me when using the Lucifer rail, right? We've talked about different strategies that I can use, putting them in the center of the room, making people have to walk through them, trying to put out a fourth one to make them explode to do bulk damage. And then I feel like this is a good case of, I've talked about how you can put them in a different spot and just like walk away, right? And you could put them on the right side of the screen and then try and fight on the left, similar to using the Zeus hammer, Zeus shield. Everything's a hammer if you think about it. But this is a good case of using, similar to what I just said, of putting them on the other side of the room, but specifically it's like a combination of that and the putting them in the middle of the room, making people walk through them. And that I put all 3 of them spread out as like a barrier between this side of the arena that I am and every enemy other than the Skull Crusher. So they're like spread out, one at the top, one in the middle, one at the bottom, where people kind of have to get hit by them, especially when you have enemies like the Gorgons that don't really want to get close to me. So it just worked out nice. It's just another way that you can use this weapon. You can just set them more like spaced out. I feel like that's part of what makes Lucifer fun for me, is like initially Lucifer was, for me specifically, was really fun because it has a laser beam, and that's just really satisfying, right? And all games should make all attacks feel amazing to use, and Supergiant's good at that. But over time it became fun for the special. and the multitude of ways that you can use it and take advantage of it. Here, I can't decide which one I want to go
you
to.
can definitely use it to your advantage for just area control, like you were saying before.
I will note, I don't think we really talked about this during the run so far. Both in Tartarus and now in Asphodel, I have taken the cast boon as soon as I could, and that's a consistent thing for all of these streams, the boonless, mirrorless, and just for anybody who's watching maybe this one first, for instance, or it's just curious. I do always take cast first because while you're doing boonless, mirrorless, you can't get a god's cast, which means you just have what's it, like a little bloodstone, I think it's called, by default. And that's not very useful because it stays lodged in enemies and it only does 100 damage. As we've seen, one of my special attacks does 100. It's just not very useful. So I'm always thankful to have that come up, especially because the game wants you to have a main thing first, like an attack, special, dash, or cast. Like once you have one of those, you can get the tier 2 ones or a call, for instance. And those are definitely the best thing to have because they're just not relevant. But from the jump, cast is always the first thing I'll look for. I paused here because Wi-Fi, I'm curious. We've talked about this briefly, but I'm curious what you think of this mini boss. Like specifically,
not my
like
favorite.
of getting
That's what I
this
think
mini
about
boss.
Of getting the mini boss. So it depends on whether you're using middle management or not. So middle management, the fight is more of a challenge because you have the Mega Gorgon head teleporting around. You have the Skull Crusher with the AoE wave. Both of which make the fight a little more hazardous. Normally, it's not that tough of a fight. It's still not my favorite, personally, just for what I'd like to see. I always prefer to get the Barge of Death, the murder boat. But yeah, it's fine. I mean, with the Hellfire, I think it's probably pretty easy for you because the Mega Gorgon doesn't move around that much. It's a small arena. You can constantly get damage on it, which you can see by the fact that it's already dead.
Yeah, so
which makes the Skull Crusher is the only real hassle for you in this fight, I would say, just because it's always up in the air.
So we've talked about this before, so it's not new to White or anything, but like Whitefire doesn't like this to get this mini boss room, and it's my favorite to get in Asphodel. And I've talked about before that there's a couple things that I look for in enemies in this game as far as like what I'm happy to see, and it's like slow, telegraphed, and not having a projectile. And both of these have a projectile because the wave and then the Gorgon has a projectile by default, but they both also fit those other two things. They're both slow and telegraphed, and the Mega Gorgon, as Whitefire said, it teleports, which can be unfortunate and can be, it can cause you a little trouble. But when it's not teleporting, it barely, if at all, moves, which is why, like Whitefire said, the Hellfire was so effective on it, right? Because even once it teleports, I just reshoot the Hellfire in the new spot that it's located. And it just gets basically a full length of damage out until it decides to teleport again. And then I just don't mind dashing through a ring in a one-horse open sleigh. I'm going to find as many ways to reference that song as I can from here on, I suppose. That's my new thing. But yeah, I don't really mind that with this enemy, so... I did pause there specifically, not just to say my piece, because I'm very important and I should always pause when I talk, but because I did specifically against this enemy, the Mega Skull Crusher, try to get him to do his slam where I had already placed those two. So that's why I walk in like a weird pattern here, and it takes him a while to slam because I'm never like directly under him, which is what he wants. Yeah, I wanted to get him to slam specifically where those two Hellfires were.
You wanted him to come on and slam.
Hey, welcome to the jam. I did want that, yes. I did also get hit specifically because I was just talking about how I prefer this fight, and it's very easy. That's kind of how things go in this game.
So to back it up a moment, I saw you were staring at that Charon sack in the shop right before this fight.
Yeah, I was, wasn't I?
What was going through your mind there? Were you thinking you could avoid a Zeus boon and take a Charon fight instead?
I'm pretty sure what I was thinking was, first of all, man, I'm really good at catching fish. And secondly, I was thinking like the Charon fight would be very fun, right? It'd be borderline effortless. It's pretty easy. It's probably my favorite fight, right? It's a good time. But I don't want to make the viewers have to sit through that when I record this and replay it on stream. So I think we'll just hop into a regular room, I think was what I was thinking there.
I'm sure that's exactly what you're thinking. I do think though that the Hellfire strategy would actually work fairly well with Charon, because Charon kind of has the same damage. What the word I'm looking for? It behaves in a similar way to the Mega Gorgon in the fight that you just did, where you can kind of lay out a bunch of hellfires, and he's not really going to avoid them. So as long as you can avoid being hit, it shouldn't be too hard of a fight.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a fair point. Again, because I am always entirely 100% a contrarian, my thought instinctively, and like what Wi-Fi is saying is making sense, so, maybe he could convince me. But I hadn't previously thought about what weapons do I like for Charon, right? I do want to clarify, Charon is probably, if not my favorite, he's among my favorite fights in this entire game. I just think it's fun. I'm glad it's there. But my first instinct would not have been that the rail, Lucifer or otherwise, would be good against him. For me specifically, not saying for other players, but for me specifically, because even though we established earlier that you can dash with the rail, I also think that is what just got me hit twice against the Mega Skull Crusher, is dashing with the rail. Because it doesn't give you the dash and vulnerability. And by default, when I'm using the rail, whether I'm using the special or the attack, I just don't dash around very much. And so I'm not in a dashing around like mindset. And that's when I'm at my best against Charon, because all his attacks are slow and he does a lot of standing in place, but all his attacks are slow and telegraphed. So they're also easy to dash through and then just be in position to get damage off. Versus with the rail, my mindset is more stay away and safely get damage off. And then he could surprise me by having better range than you might think, or you get in a tough situation where you're staying far away and then you have to avoid a bunch of things once you get to like the later stages, and he's got the clouds as well as him attacking and so on and so forth. We are in an Erebus room now, though.
Yeah, you got the double health on the line. Hopefully you don't take a hit.
Yeah, so
you can see here we have some wave makers, an infernal bomber. What else do we have? We have bloodless. So not terribly hard enemies, honestly.
I think this Erebus decision was like the most one-sided decision you could have during a boonless mirrorless run. You were giving me double.
I'm actually
double
surprised
hard.
that you're getting. I'm surprised that you're only getting Asphodel enemies despite being an Asphodel.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've talked about that on stream before, but Erebus can definitely have enemies that are harder than the area that you're in, but they're not guaranteed to. But yeah, I was just saying that it was the best that I could possibly get in having like a 50 health point Centaur Heart versus the one boon that I was offered otherwise was Hermes. So it was like the easiest possible decision in a run like this. Erebus rooms, I feel like, and when I say this, I mean literally like the room, the map layout for me. I kind of like them. I feel like they work very much in Zagreus's favor, in the player's favor, because they always give you
100%.
pillars. There's no traps. They're very big. And in this one specifically, like there is a designated center area, which, although I'm using the Hellfire specifically, I feel like also works fine with any weapon,
Yeah, I would say that the Erebus trials are probably one of the most fair rooms in the entire game, as far as like being in the player's benefit.
And because of what Wi-Fi just said, them being the most fair, they're also probably like the single most thing that you get upset at yourself for when you fail.
Oh, 100%, because it's your own fault.
With that being said, I just backed up here again, just clarification for anybody who's just kind of new to the game, wants to do 32 for the first time, is curious about weapons, so on and so forth. When you get late in the game and you buy some house contractor, I'm stumbling over my words, house contractor upgrades, eventually you get ones that make all the house rewards or the blue laurel rewards, however you want to think about them, have effects that affect in run as well. So my decision here was the one on the left would give me money. It gives you like 20 gold, I believe, or obols, I should say. The key gives you a reroll, and then the darkness gives you health. And rerolls can be useful, but the thing is they can also just not be useful and not helpful in this run type specifically. The gold I just didn't need because we had kind of addressed earlier that was going well for me in that regard. And so I went with the health here. Generally, I would favor the health even over the rerolls, but not always.
Yeah, I think rerolls with Fated Authority aren't, like, having one extra reroll with Fated Authority doesn't make as big a difference as having it with Fated Persuasion. So the difference there, for anybody who doesn't know, Fated Authority, which is the one that QB's using, allows him to reroll the room reward before he enters a room. It only costs one roll per change, and you can use as many rolls as you want, or as many as you have on a door. It will start cycling back onto the previous choices at some point. Usually, I think after like 3 total choices, like 3 to 4 total offerings. But Fated Persuasion allows you to reroll both the Wells of Charon and the boon menus. Obviously, in a boonless run, you don't really care about rerolling the boons. Well, I mean, you can make a case where sometimes you would.
Yeah, I think we specifically talked
care
about that before.
rerolling it. Yeah, I don't know if that was on stream or off stream, but yes, we did talk about that. But rerolling shops can actually be really useful because, you know, if you're low on health and you go to a shop and it doesn't have any health, hey, if you can reroll that, then cool. Let's just say, my whole point of saying earlier that Fated Authority having one extra roll doesn't make as much of a difference is because you often spend 2 to 3 rolls on a door anyways, so having one extra isn't a big deal.
Yeah, I would say in regards to that, the exception for that would be if there's like one specific thing you can't afford to take, which for me would be that I view Hermes that way. So like if you reroll Hermes and then you get Ares is what I was thinking. They're both black and red. I'm totally excused for making that mistake. Then like that's a win in my mind because Hermes is, I've talked about this on stream before, but he just has a lot of boons that are hard not to take advantage of in a boonless run. So in my mind, he has the potential to be an run ender by himself. Like he could be the first boon that you get, and all 3 of his offerings could end your run. So I try to avoid Hermes at all costs. If I could change him into like Ares, for instance, Ares is also not convenient, but it saved my whole run. So that's just kind of my thoughts on the switching. But in general, everything Whitefire said is accurate and relevant. The only reason I paused right here was because Zagreus looks like the Human Torch, and it's really cool. No, actually, the reason that I paused right here is because this just goes into a point that Whitefire was making early in the stream about using the dash while doing the laser. Now, I don't do it effectively because I'm bad at this game. Honestly, you shouldn't really, don't use my gameplay as a role model. It's not good. But I use the dash here to try and avoid his attack while also continuing the laser ramp up, which is kind of what you want to do traditionally if you're trying to get good damage with the laser.
And you definitely ate a bomb. How do you like your bombs, QB? Like them like over easy or sunny side up?
It's funny you went with the eggs comparison because I was going to say when I'm in Asphodel specifically, I like them well done, almost burnt, you could say. And there was me doing a slightly better job of that.
So I'm still thinking about that egg that I had this morning. It was so good.
For anybody who's not familiar with that, which would be most people that listen to this, I assume. I didn't really do much plugging at the beginning of this stream specifically, but Whitefire does also stream, and he may not be of the mind to plug himself, but I think his streams are super fun and fantastic. He streams every weekend, and it's a good time. You should come hang out. In addition to that, Whitefire is both in my Discord as well as has his own, where you could see beautiful pictures of breakfast burgers. Well loved in the Asphodel region specifically. So earlier I mentioned like mini boss room draws in Tartarus, and this is just an example that like sometimes QB just sucks against a bomb flinger for no reason, but that doesn't happen against a Shadow Sneak. I am completely impeccable all the time.
I'm curious why you keep calling it the Shadow Sneak.
Hey, it's close enough. It's definitely close enough, right?
I mean, the sneak part's right. I've never heard anybody refer to the Shadow Sneak.
I don't know the correct name. Whitefire, you know I don't know the correct name is the thing.
I know you don't know the correct name. I was like giving you a hard time. It's Wretched Sneak.
I thought I was pretty close. It had alliteration, kind of.
So most of the enemies in Tartarus are Wretched, insert name here, including the Sneak. So the more you know.
That is actually the more you know for me, because I was entirely convinced that there was alliteration on that name. So as you can see, we're fighting Lerny, and we talked about this with the Zeus shield on a previous stream, but like Lerny does a lot of staying in place, and so does his summons. So having an attack that can kind of lock him, not lock him, but an attack that locks itself in place and does damage to anybody who's not moving is very convenient for this fight in general.
Yeah, the Hellfire is definitely doing good work here. You'd think that a creature that lives in magma wouldn't have any issues with a little bit of Hellfire.
That is a good point. You would think that. I will say that I feel like, yeah, that happened. I feel like the Lucifer rail, for me specifically, even without being enhanced by any Daedalus hammers, it is very useful early game. I mean, obviously all weapons are going to be useful early game, but it's useful early game because the enemies haven't gotten better at moving, right? Because there's some weapons where enemies get better and it doesn't matter. Like there's been cases even with previous streams that I've done this where like they more so just become damage sponges, because if you can hit stun the enemy, then you can hit stun the enemy, and that's the extent of their threat. It's just how do I go about hit stunning them. But with this weapon in particular, the early enemies, like I use Lerny as a boss fight example, but even the rest of the enemies that we've kind of been coming across in these first two areas, they don't really go out of their way to avoid my Hellfire, and that's very nice. I appreciate that. It's very thoughtful of them.
That is actually an interesting thing to note, though, because that's definitely a design decision regarding enemies avoiding attacks. Because in some games, I don't know if Supergiant's ever done it in any of their games. If they have, well, maybe Transistor, and you can maybe argue Fire, but I'll finish making my point. The enemies don't avoid your attacks at all in Hades. Whereas in some games, the enemies are programmed to avoid your attacks, which is interesting. That might have been something interesting as like a Pact option, maybe like oh, you know, the enemies have better AI and will try to avoid your attacks. But I don't know if that would have been an easy thing to implement.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that it might not be so easy to implement. It is an interesting thing to think about, though. Even like in other combat-intensive games, they may have like a block or a parry or a dodge mechanic. And I don't mean dodge like a dodge percent like the Zagreus gloves or fists. But I mean like legitimately dodging. And like you said, they don't do that in this game. There are enemies that have shields, but even then they run their own pattern. They're going to lift their shield up when they're going to lift their shield up. They're not trying to time it to your attacks. Or specifically, they're going to lift their shield up when they are trying to attack. So I don't know how thoroughly RNG this is, but I feel like oftentimes in Elysium, this goes to my previous point of oftentimes in Asphodel, I get Hermes. But oftentimes in Elysium, the first area, I get the hammer, which is, I know that's kind of programmed to be that way. Not necessarily the first one every time, but it's pretty consistently early. But I usually get the hammer versus a centaur heart in the first room. And that's very unfortunate, specifically because I don't know if it's pure RNG or if they're like, we'll only offer a centaur heart every so many chambers. We're not going to offer a centaur heart every single chamber just because that's luck of the RNG draw, you know? But I feel like I'm missing out on a potential centaur heart because I'm always going to take the hammer, if that is the draw.
You never want to see two things that you want. You never want to see two or more things that you want from the same offering. So it is unfortunate when that happens. There are some like percentage weighting things for what rewards you are offered and like how often you can see things, but I don't know what those numbers break down to. But yeah, it's definitely unfortunate if you get offered a heart and a hammer at the same time.
So Wayfire, I believe we talked about this on the previous stream, but I am curious if you could elaborate a little further, because I think we touched on like one or two that we may like or dislike. But I feel like I've talked extensively about like the Elysium enemies and which ones I prefer to see, and it's mainly built around health and hit stun. I couldn't decide which one I wanted to say first. They were really just fighting for like priority there. But I'm curious what you think of the Elysium enemies in general. Like which ones you prefer to draw, which ones you think work well against certain weapons, certain playstyles.
I feel like we did talk about this at one point, but maybe it was off stream.
I guess we could pause for the
really
data
does for me
real quick.
No, it's fine. You took triple bomb. It's cool. Yeah, so it really depends on what sort of run I'm doing, like what weapon I have and what sort of build I'm going for what enemies I prefer to see. I will say that most of the time I'm not going to be happy to see a Great Shield.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a consensus.
Just because they're just because they're annoying. You know, with the blocking, unless you have something that pierces the shield, and then you know whatever, there's another enemy. But I would say Great Shields, they're pretty high up there on enemies I don't want to see in Elysium. Aside from that, there's nothing really that stands out. I'm not a big fan of the Soul Catchers, but like they don't really bother me. They're more of a inconvenience just because they are a bit of a damage sponge.
I will say that for the Great Shield specifically, in addition, because you said they become just another enemy, which isn't incorrect, but I do think that their attacks, in addition to their blocks, are also just difficult attacks to deal with.
That's interesting. I don't think they're too bad personally, because they tend to be fairly close range. Like they're not going to attack you from far away, and the attack itself doesn't have a lot of reach on it.
I suppose
So I don't think I have a huge issue with him.
Yeah, I mean, Whitefire and I have diverse opinions on this game. We're very, very different, which is I think is fun. I say it a lot, but it's not at all sarcastic. I think it's fun. But I should clarify that when I think of an enemy's skill sets, I'm usually thinking of the armored version. And so they have like a triple beam in addition to a dash and spin. And both of those can just potentially be problematic to me.
Sure, yeah.
I do want to clarify, we did kind of breeze over the Daedalus Hammer. And I mentioned, first of all, there's the snacks on the screen. Again, for anybody who's a beginner or just kind of like trying to learn strategies or anything, specifically here, I avoided them the whole fight. You don't want to step over them when you have full health, right? So because I knew I hadn't taken damage, even if I had taken like 3 damage, that's not maximizing the health of them. I was waiting to see if I got hit in the room. But in regards to the hammer, I feel like this makes me sound like I didn't super duper prepare for this. But yeah, with the Lucifer rail, I kind of just like the Lucifer rail, so I was like, I'm just gonna freestyle a bit. But I took the triple bomb, and then when I took it in that very room before I proceeded, by the way, everybody, you can check weapons out before you proceed. A lot of people are always in such a rush when I watch new people playing this game. They'll get something, they're like, I'll find out what it does when I attack an enemy, and I'm like, you don't have to do that. But yeah, so I checked it out specifically because I was like curious. I was like, it feels like a good idea, especially because I had the Greater Inferno before. But I ended up thinking that it was just like absolutely amazing. You can kind of see it immediately in that first room, but you can get 3 down, which touches on something I said earlier in the stream about how you can get hit stun by having 3 close to each other. So if you send 3 out, you get guaranteed hit stun for anybody who walks in that, like hit stun loop. Like they're gonna be trapped as long as they don't have armor or the ability to get out of any hit stun, like the swordsman. And you can also make them explode so much easier. Instead of having to shoot 3 individual ones and then a 4th one, you can shoot 3 and then shoot another 3, which not only is going to make the other 3 explode, there's also going to be 3 more. So if they explode in the same place, like if you're shooting them in the same place, that's now 6 explosions, which is a lot of damage. Like, maybe the chunkiest damage output you can get with a weapon in Boonless. Haven't done that much research.
Yeah, it's definitely effective. It's a shame that you can't get Cluster Bomb with Lucifer.
Is it a shame or is it fair, Whitefire?
I mean, depends on what sort of perspective you're coming at it from.
But yeah, once I had this, and we've talked about this in a previous stream as well, but getting the wizards, witches. Are wizards and witches just the male and female equivalent of each other, or are they very different? I don't know.
Probably depends on what sort of system you're looking at.
I feel like they're very different.
In different properties, they'll have different sort of meanings, but
I was specifically thinking, like, I feel like wizard has more of a positive connotation, unless that's just my experience.
I mean, maybe. Certainly, witches are often maligned, but it really just depends on the setting. Like, in some settings, a wizard and a witch are equivalent. In others, they're completely different things.
But the reason...
But that's kind of getting off of Hades.
I was going to say, the reason that I bring that up in general is just because we've talked about this before, but getting Thanatos, the enemies that are drawn are very relevant to, like, how aggressively you want to pursue the Thanatos challenge in a situation like this. And getting witches in Elysium is probably best case scenario, right? Maybe flame wheels.
Oh, absolutely. No, witches for sure.
But yeah, and that's specifically because they can be threatening with their attacks, but they're not threatening with their ability to avoid or dodge or be tanky. And they have very little health, so you can defeat them before Thanatos can.
Yeah.
As we can see here, I wasted money on a well and then immediately got a fountain. So that's always fun. I'm going broke now with my 916.
I was just going to say, the opposite end of the spectrum for Thanatos would be like if you're getting a bunch of Exalted or like Nemean Chariots or something that have a lot of health and take too long to kill, so Thanatos just ends up killing them before you anyways.
Correct, yeah, especially if they're armored.
That would be,
The only good thing about getting the Exalted Shades is that you get 2 kills for them and he only gets 1, so the only potential benefit.
Yeah, there was actually a time when Thanatos wouldn't outright kill them. So like if he killed one of the Exalted, the 4 different, it would be the sword or shield or spear or bow, it would still pop a shade out, and then you could kill that shade.
That's interesting.
But it doesn't do that anymore because that was a little cheap on Zagreus' part.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds like so.
Nurse.
Yeah, so we talk about this every time that we get a mini boss in Elysium, but you know, it's just worth pointing out in that, similar to what I said earlier about Hermes versus a double centaur heart in Erebus, Asterius versus the butterfly boss that I know the name of is the easiest. I mean, it's not a decision that you get to choose, but like it's a best case scenario versus a worst case scenario for sure. It's not like you can make the argument for one or the other. Because even if you don't like fighting Asterius in this type of run, well, you're going to have to. So why not learn, you know? Unless you just really plan to tank out the final fight of this area.
Yeah, I guess it really depends on your play style.
And again, I am talking
I would say
specifically
that-
with this challenge.
Yeah, no, I get with this challenge. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how I actually feel about that. I think in some ways the Dire Soul Catcher is still easier than Asterius, but the advantage of fighting Asterius here is that he has less health in the Heroes fight.
Yeah, I would say I was kind of talking as if that was a given. In addition to him having lower health later, it is also just a factor of what I said a moment ago, which is practice doesn't hurt when you're going to have to fight him. As you can see at the end of the Asterius fight, it was just kind of what I was talking about when I send out 3 and then send out another 3 of the same special in the same spot where they're going to explode and you get 6 explosions. And I think you also get the explosions in addition to the landing 100, because when the special lands, it does 100 before it even starts to radiate. It just does chunky damage. It did like 998 or something like that to him. He also ran into the thing, which did damage, but I think the totals were separate on the screen. And the 998 was limited by the fact that it was finishing that fight, so it didn't show the total amount that it did.
I will say you've gotten poppers a lot as a benefit package this run.
That's, yeah.
Poppers being the souls split out into multiple exploding souls.
Yeah, and that's an example of how certain enemies can have unique benefits packages. That's an example of one that, I mean, I don't know what the consensus is, but I can't imagine that giving many people problems. That's like a good one to draw. Versus like the witches, for example, I don't like when they have the homing. That actually got me hit earlier in this run, and I didn't feel the need to point it out, but maybe now I am. Who knows?
Look, I wasn't going to point it out, but
yeah, this is actually a good point. I've taken advantage of this with other weapons as well, specifically again with the Zeus shield. So the Lucifer rail, especially once I can launch 3 now, like I can, it's even more similar to the Zeus shield. We've made the comparison earlier in the run, but it's very similar to the Zeus shield, and even has advantages that the Zeus shield doesn't, right? Because the Zeus shield has to come back to you eventually. These 3 can stay there forever until they're destroyed, in which case they just do chunk damage anyway. You can't make them trail behind you like the Zeus shield, so there are trade-offs each way, you know? But I just think it's an interesting comparison. Where I was going with that was with the Zeus shield, I talked about this before, the fact that the Elysium traps rebuild, or I don't even know if you call that thing a trap, the thing that you can destroy and does damage, because it's not really a trap, it's not trapping you.
no, that's not the trap. That's just a column or pillar, whatever you want to call it.
But it's an interactable, like it's an environment interactable that's relevant to the fight. It's not just like a wall that you can't walk through. And having that rebuild itself the same way that the traps do in Elysium is useful, especially with weapons like the Zeus or these Hellfires, because you can just position them on it and they'll do damage to anybody who walks through, and they'll also just keep destroying that, which will also do damage to anybody that walks in that area. Just a convenience.
Definitely. So I see that you got a nectar here as an offering, and I'm sure you were totally going to take that, not the key, because you wanted to upgrade your Zeus cast, right?
Yeah, that was actually something that I forgot earlier when I was listing the benefits of the house items. The nectar also gives you the equivalent of a random pomegranate, which I guess is like a slice of pomegranate that you can get in Charon shop. So it's not useful to this run, but again, it does still have a use that it can get from the house contractor. I don't know if this is just me.
Yeah, it's very useful in a normal run.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if
Because-
this is just me, but I feel like I never see pomegranates when I'm like late game now. I don't know if they become less likely over time, or if they were never likely to begin with.
No, that might just be your mirror options
Yeah, it's possible.
affecting that, but it shouldn't, like the spawn rate shouldn't be any different.
Like I feel like in Tartarus, I always get offered like a key or darkness. But yeah, with that being said, you were getting ready to say that they're very useful in a normal run, and yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, like the thing with pomegranates is, like if you're using, what's the mirror thing? The one that gives you more, like a higher chance of gods and hammers, boons and hammers. That's also somewhat, I think, taking away the number of, like, the potential number of palms and hearts that you're going to see. I could be wrong about that, but
No,
that
I
might be
think what
why
you're saying
you
makes sense.
see less.
Although I do think what you're saying makes sense in general for me, just feeling like I see them less. But I do also want to clarify that I was like, I see them less in comparison to the other blue laurel items, is what it feels like for me. Like I don't feel
Oh,
like
palms aren't blue. Palms aren't blue laurel items though. They're gold.
interesting. I would not have thought that because they're like a house item. They're not useful in a run until you get the house contractor
Palms?
thing. Oh no, I'm talking about the nectar.
Oh, you
Nectar.
mean you're
Yes,
saying
yes,
nectar?
yes, yes, yes.
Oh, you're saying pomegranate still.
Oh goodness.
No, nectar.
I was saying the wrong thing. Well, the nectar functions like a pomegranate
yes.
in this a pomegranate slice specifically.
Yeah, well, I think nectar has a lower chance to show up anyways. Like it's less common than darkness and keys.
Okay.
I think
That's what I was saying. I was just saying the wrong thing. So that's my mistake.
But I don't know the actual numbers on it, so I could be wrong.
Here we are. Again, I don't think I clarified this at any point in this run, but this is a recording, and I do a lot of pausing. I try to skip through it. I won't skip any actual content, but I'm not in a rush when I'm doing things, which is part of the reason that I don't like speedrunning. So I take breathers, and I mentioned this multiple times. But Wi-Fi, I'm curious if you agree or are interested in elaborating on. I've said multiple times that I think that the Heroes fight and the Hades fight himself are skill checks in difficult runs. Like if the heat level is difficult for you, if you're not doing something that's like relatively trivial, I feel like those are big skill checks.
Oh, absolutely. I would say the heroes is probably the biggest skill check. Like if you can get through the heroes, then there's a pretty good chance that you can get through the Hades fight as well. Although it's a matter of practice, of course. Like if you've fought the heroes, like you're just learning the game or whatever, and you've fought the heroes a dozen times before you beat them, it doesn't automatically mean you're going to get through the Hades fight too. But I think, at least for myself, if I make it through the heroes on a run, there's a good chance that I'm also going to make it through Hades on a run.
I'm taking an extra long break at this point. I don't know if I walked aside to actually get food or anything, but I came back, and what I was doing there, as you saw, I took long enough of a break for the screen to darken, which means when I came back, I was like, what does my weapon do? Let's remember. That's probably useful, right? So that's your genius person trying to do a challenge for the first time ever. Also forgets how their weapon functions, right? Very impressive. Please be impressed.
That's actually a big reason why when I did still play Hades often, I did not like leaving a run, like leaving the game mid-run. I'd always try and finish out a run because if I have to come back to it, I almost never remember what I was doing, or you kind of lose your feel for the run.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And that applies to most roguelikes as well. I will say that I talk a lot about, throughout all of these streams, all of the series, I've talked a lot about like hit stun and how I like to take advantage of that. But the thing is, hit stun is never effective in a boss fight. Unless the boss fight summons adds, but that's only really the first one, because Hades summons them, but they're basically all armor. So hit stun, as much as I love it, it's not particularly useful in boss fights. That being said, other than me using it like the Zeus shield that I referenced earlier, this is not a weapon that's centered around hit stun in general, or even in my playstyle to a degree, right? So it makes the boss fights not that different, which is good, right? I can use the same skill set and playstyle that I've been using the whole time.
Your comment about hit stun and bosses actually reminds me of something that you were saying a while back about how you only ever use like max charges on your calls. Obviously not for this challenge, but just playing in general. But is Charm not effectively a hit stun QB? And then you could say that you can hit stun bosses as long as you have Aphrodite's Call and use it in a single charge.
Charm,
which is actually very effective.
Yes, and I have heard that, right? With what Whitefire is talking about, I don't know how much I've talked about it during this series versus just like on other streams or while playing other games or on other people's streams. But for the longest time when I was playing, I didn't use the segmented call attacks. I would only use the full bar. And I still favor the full bar. There'll be a lot of times that I just forget the call's even a thing when I'm in a regular room that doesn't have time to build up for. But in regards to what you were specifically saying, yes, Aphrodite's standard call is a hit stun, but it's also not, wow, that was terrible. It's also not a hit stun that does damage. You know, it's not a hit stun attack. it's just like a passive charm. That's probably why it doesn't register the same way in my brain.
Yeah, it's probably more fair to say it's an interrupt than it is a hit stun, because that's primarily what you want to use it for. Like if you know the boss is winding up to do an attack, and you can just send out an Aphrodite charm, and then they just stop whatever they're doing and then reset. So in that regard, it's very useful. But yes, it's not actually a hit stun because it's not doing any damage.
So to be clear, I'm now Claire.
Hello, Claire.
To be clear, that's not particularly relevant to this fight, as we've talked about the call. But I will say, in regard to Whitefire saying that like I like hit stun, I talk about hit stun all the time. That is true, but I do think it's important to note that I talk a lot about being able to hit stun loop enemies. Being able to hit stun in general is nice. You can interrupt them when they're doing something, but Aphrodite's, and I'm not just harping on this specifically because you brought it up, but like, you know, it just makes a good point of conversation. Aphrodite's standard call cannot hit stun lock somebody. It's just one hit stun that you get one time. I mean, if you have more segments of the bar, you can do it more, obviously. But the general thing that I look for with weapons or with techniques in this game or any other game, and again, I like to think of Streets of Rage as my go-to example because it's just an old school beat 'em up, but is the ability to hit stun lock an enemy. And like, I feel like in Streets of Rage, for somebody who's just playing it for the first time, who just kind of is playing games, not trying to like overthink it or strategize, you're going to do your little combo attack with your character. You're going to punch. They're going to do a little combo. It's going to be cool, right? But the thing is, you could just jab and pause and jab and pause and jab and pause, and the enemy can't get out of it. A standard enemy in like an old school beat 'em up usually can't get out of something like that. And that's kind of how I approach Hades. I do want to back up because there's a couple things of note in this fight that were Aphrodite calling over. Another reason the Aphrodite call is very relevant is because I happen to have the most charming guest on that I could possibly have. But no, a couple things that I wanted to note here is there was one point down bottom, I don't know if I'll be able to find it, where I did big damage to him and like the bombs went off. I did the 6 bomb thing that I was talking about in addition to doing other damage. It said like 1600 damage, but then it also had a different number on the screen. I wasn't sure if the big number was also part of that or not. I don't know if you had any input there, but
I didn't catch that, so I'd have to see it again.
Yeah, I'd have to find the specific point.
Exactly what it
but
is.
if it is, then I did 1600 damage total, and that's still pretty chunky damage. If it's not, I did way more than 1600, and that's absurdly chunky damage for Boonless, which kind of ties into what I was getting ready to say here, which is when I knock him out of his chariot here, I don't think, maybe with Hestia, because I've never used Hestia, but I don't think there's really any opportunity in a Boonless, Mirrorless 32 heat run. Well, I guess the Pact also makes a big difference as well, but I was going to say not an opportunity to defeat Theseus, just one-shot him before he can start fighting with the god. And I don't do that here, but I come darn near close to it with how much damage output the Lucifer Rail has.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't be doing that with Hestia either. Not in a situation like this.
It's just like, yeah, I'm dodging this god attack, but with him being vulnerable there, they're doing 300 even. So like, even if I'm not able to get the big attack off, like I said, I want to get the 6 explosion. If I'm not able to do that, he's still taking a steady 300 at, you know, at reasonable clips.
Yeah, so I did see there that you got 1,000 cumulative. Wow, words are hard. 1,000 cumulative damage just a second ago, but I didn't see 1,600.
Yeah,
and that was just the effect of stacking the Hellfire.
And it may have been me attacking with the beam as well. So it could have been what I said. It wasn't 1,600 plus the other number. Probably that number was part of it. You know, like if I got the 700 with the laser and then the 900 to 1,000 with the Hellfire. Something else that I specifically wanted to rewind to. I feel like I did really good in this fight, actually, other than that one time where I let Theseus just hit me with his chariot and his attacks for like...
Yeah, where he ran you over for a minute there?
Yeah, I was like, roadkill? Sounds fun. But no, other than that, I feel like I did pretty good in this fight. I did want to clarify. I've mentioned this before. I think that Demeter's whatever call for Theseus is... I don't want to say unbalanced because it's not a competitive game, but is disproportionately hard compared to any other option that he could get. And like, it doesn't even feel particularly close in my mind. Because she has her attack that she's doing, but then his, I didn't notice this for a long time actually, so maybe I'm silly. But she also does these blue radial ones, the like thing that's the same as her call when you have it. And I thought that she just spawned them near you, like purposely near Zagreus, but no, that she spawns them where he throws his weapon, which makes sense because a lot of the other gods do their effect with his attacks. But multiple of those spirals can be out while she's also doing her standard attack with the big circles that are on the screen that aren't her call, while he's also throwing his attack at you. And that's more than any other god can do in addition to him. It's usually just circles
Demeter,
and him attacking.
Demeter's pretty widely regarded as the worst god you can get in the heroes fight. For all the reasons that you just said.
Yeah, actually, no, that one's a good example. I just noticed a moment ago that I said, like, it's where his spear lands, and then this one is not. He does his spin attack, and it specifically does go underneath me. It doesn't go where he does his spin attack. Like, I don't understand, and this is, all right, QB crying about things. I don't understand what I could have possibly did here. Like, how was I going to know exactly when it spawned? I mean, I guess in accordance to his attack, but it spawned directly under me and immediately damages me before it's even visible on the screen. That upsets me. That's my rant. Usually I like to stay pretty casual during these, but that's my rant during this. Yeah,
It's probably just because it was cold related. We all know how you feel about cold.
That is true. That is true. If you're a fan of cold weather, I appreciate you stopping in. We don't agree on anything, you and I. But yeah, no, so I feel like the heroes fight went really well. I mean, even the Demeter thing that I just complained about a second ago, it did do legitimately 1 damage to me. So shows you how much it takes to ruffle my feathers. Money, as I referenced earlier, is still absurdly good at this point. I was about to say, I have to go back and get the traps, right? There's just no reason not to.
I like how you bought the darkness. I assume that was just so you can get a badge back at the house.
Yeah, and typically during a run like this, for anybody who's like, what is the competitive, not competitive, but like the gameplay benefit, there's not. I'm just doing that because the Hades grind is pretty substantial if you want to 100% the game. And I've done everything except get enough darkness for silly badges. So I was just like, yeah, you know, I'm rich.
If you really want to do that, you can focus on like darkness farming runs where you take choices that increase your darkness drop.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're going for chaos for the increased gems and darkness. You're going to Poseidon for Ocean's Bounty. You're picking up Dark Thirst in your weapon. And you can make quite a bit of darkness per run doing that. But yeah, the grind is real.
Yeah, I've done exactly what Whitefire just said in the past a couple times, and I realized I didn't have it in me to grind things out like that. I did for like a couple runs, and I was like, that's kind of crazy how much you can do, because I think I defeated Hades and the darkness was like in the thousands, like closer to 2 than 1. Sure. It's like 1600 darkness, and I'm like, wow, that's so cool. And then you realize that in the grand scheme of thing, you have to do that like 300 times to get the amount of darkness you need.
No, you don't have to do that 300 times. You only need like 325,000 total.
Yeah, and I made like 1,000. So.
Well, that's just from the Hades fight, though. Like, if you maximize.
Yeah, no, I wasn't talking about the runs and everything. I was saying that amount 300 times.
Oh yeah, that amount.
I probably didn't say that very clearly, but that's how my mind was working.
Yeah, you'd still have to do like 100 or so runs.
But yeah, the grind wasn't in it for me. But it is a fun thing and a cool thing if you're interested or you weren't familiar with that. You can get pretty chunky darkness amounts, especially with it affecting other things too, because a lot of the things we referenced between Poseidon and the chaos and the darkness enhancement on the weapon, it affects other things that you pick up too, like the other bosses, for instance, or just regular room clears, or, you know, any darkness that you can just stumble upon. The only reason I backed up here is just because I like to clarify that the only really good thing that he can give me here is a centaur heart, and he did, which is fantastic. I also feel like, I don't know if this is for certain, but I feel like there almost always is at least one centaur heart in Styx. So that's nice. Basically just got 50 health for coming through 6, which isn't good relative to a biome. Like, you can do better than that. I got 50 for 1 room before.
Yeah, and your health isn't bad though, 310.
But yeah, all in all, wasn't a bad draw there. And for me specifically, and Whitefire, I don't know if you want to touch on this as just a conversation point, but I feel like I'm a little out of the norm in that I like the not mini boss rooms. I prefer them, regular gameplay wise, also this style gameplay wise. As opposed to going to the mini boss ones. So for me, a centaur heart, wherever it's going to appear in Styx, is going to be good. Because if it appears in the mini boss room, it's worth double the value. But if it appears in not a mini boss room, then I don't have to do a mini boss room.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's not an intuitive choice to make, to take the mini boss tunnels first. But it's kind of a min-maxing thing where you're banking on the game giving you, and it does also kind of go into the go fast mentality as well. You're banking on the game giving you a 2-sack, right? So at the very least, if you take your second tunnel as a mini boss, then there's a good chance that you're going to get it for free and not have to fight the mini boss anyways.
Yeah, that is a fair point.
Whereas if you just take the standard tunnels first, you might get your sack in that second tunnel, and then you're only getting a regular reward for free.
I will say I'm
But-
curious. Go ahead, actually, because I'm going to be a bit of a
I was
transition.
gonna say, but in general, the mini boss rooms are faster because they're only a single wave. The arenas are, for the most part, very small, so there's not a lot of running around. And yeah, it's just generally speaking, they're going to be a lot faster.
And for anybody who's curious where I'm like, I don't prefer them, my reasoning there would just be that mini bosses can be hard depending on your playstyle and what you're doing, like what I'm doing with this challenge. And so they could be potentially run-ending, whereas these rooms, while they can, especially with benefits package, they're just not particularly likely to be.
Yeah, I find I actually take more damage in these standard rooms than I do in the mini boss rooms.
Yeah, that's why I did want to clarify both playstyle and what challenge you're doing. Because we even saw an example before where if it wasn't for the ability for, like, in a previous run with the gloves, if it wasn't for the ability of mini rats to heal me, it would have been a run ender for me in this specific series, you know? But yeah, a couple other things I was thinking of is, firstly, I'm just curious, this is just a little side thing I noticed in the last room. Actually, something I just did that I just noticed was, a good point, Hellfire can fly in the middle of the air like the enemies, so that's nice. You don't have to get it on land. Which is just gameplay convenience, quality of life thing. It makes sense. But what I was actually going to say was the rats in the last room, the little ones, not the giant vermin. Do they have legitimately 1 HP? Because I've never seen anything not kill them.
I think they have 3. I think they might have 1, but they might also have like 2 or 3 health.
Interesting.
Regardless, they're basically one-hit kill no matter what.
Yeah, and I was just going to put that out there for anybody who's playing this game, checking this game out, you know, wants to just know any general tips. It's just that. The rats can die from literally anything. Like, you want to use your fastest attack. Don't think, oh, I want to use my fastest attack that does 10 damage, at least. Although, again, I can't think of anything that won't kill them. So just fastest, period. Something else that I was going to say, oh, that was fantastic. So, again, I did play these. This is my gameplay, but it was a while ago, so I did not remember that the reroll worked out for me. So this is one of my strategies. I've talked about this before, is saving the rerolls for Styx. If you're confident, or not even confident, like ideally on a good run, you want to be able to get through the rest of the game without having to use your rerolls. If you have to use your rerolls, then like obviously something went wrong between Tartarus and Elysium. But if you can get through Tartarus and all the way through Elysium, from Tartarus all the way through Elysium without using them, then that's good because you have them for Styx, and there's nowhere later that you could possibly need them. And Styx is 5 rooms. And it has things that are very bad, which are boons, which can be turned into the best thing that you can get, which is a Cinder Heart, which is what happens here. I don't think on any of my other runs that happened. I think it almost always the reroll was just not beneficial whatsoever. But this is the idea behind it. And it worked out fantastic, especially being a mini boss room specifically. And also going into what Wildfire said, the minimum amount of rooms that, like, routes that you'll need to get the Satyr Sack is 2, which is why I do it now instead of taking the money, which is also, you know, not a boon. It's why I don't take that route first. I use the reroll now.
I hope you do get a 2 or maybe 3 sack at most, because then you'll have a truly boonless run.
Yeah,
not just a effectively boonless run.
Wouldn't that be nice? And for clarification on what Wildfire is saying is, with the high heat community, with the community for the challenges in regards to this game, boonless is considered not using any boon during run, so you can have a boon on your attack, for instance. If you just don't ever press attack, that's fine. But the game, not only will the victory screen not have a single boon if you don't get one at any point, the game also has something where it's like Olympian free or something, which is the game acknowledging that you didn't get an Olympian boon.
Yeah, it says 100% Olympian free. You're also eligible just by virtue of doing the mirrorless challenge of getting 100% darkness free. That's the title.
Yeah, I think that happened on a previous stream where I specified exactly what I just said. Where I was like, yeah, I don't qualify for Olympian free on this one. I was like, it did say darkness free on the screen at the time. Something else I was thinking a little bit back when you were like, we were talking, you said something in regard to the go fast mentality. I'm just curious, because I feel like it's probably fair to say that you've been a little more dialed into the Hades community than I ever have, right?
Yeah, that'd be fair to say.
So I'm curious how much of the general meta is built around tight deadline / speedrunning meta as well. Like, how much do those really tie in with each other? Because I don't feel like you see a lot of people doing things that
I would say there's a pretty high overlap, where that even if you're not actually actively speedrunning, there's a good chance that if you're asking for advice, or if someone's giving advice, that they're giving it from a background that's been influenced by speedrunning. So that's not to say that all their advice is going to be about going fast, but it's more that the things you have to do to go fast just make you a more effective player.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say in regards to what you were saying, which is like a lot of going fast isn't just going fast for the sake of saving time. It's efficient, right? It's not just how fast can you beat the clock. It's how fast can you destroy an enemy, which is beneficial because that enemy is now destroyed, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What we see here is that we got a really good reroll to the Centaur Heart, right? Oh, and for clarification, I say that it's efficient. And Wayfire and I have talked about this back and forth a bunch, but my mindset is that it's efficient so long as you do effectively kill them, right? If you take a hit while going fast, then suddenly, it could just be an execution error, but suddenly it's not the most efficient thing to do. Whereas my mindset kind of finds the best mitigation thing for me in my playstyle, which is why
is taking damage inefficient? I don't know.
Depends on
the resource.
Depends on your goal, right? But yeah, that's just kind of where my mentality is, because it's like I'm calling this the most efficient thing you can do, and then I'm showing you gameplay of me not doing that. But yeah, my mindset is towards not putting that much execution pressure on myself if it can be helped, and more so using the strategy and the mitigation and the other things that I think I can do more effectively. I paused here because we got the double Centaur Heart on the reroll. That's fantastic, man. RNG loves me. They think so highly of me. Then we got a mini boss room with the rail against double armored mini bosses, including everyone's favorite friend, the satyr there. This was not a draw I was happy with at all in the moment. I don't remember not being happy with it, but I'm entirely certain that I wasn't. What I do here from the beginning, and I've clarified this before because I use Antos for every run, which is the Achilles summon. What I do here is try to get hit on both of the mini bosses and also use Achilles before the regular ads come in, so that the mini bosses don't do the damage control hit, but they do exclusively hit the mini bosses and not the regular rats that show up, which I think is effectively what happens. I think the rats come on screen, but I think they do hit both the satyr and the other one.
The satyr didn't take any damage that I saw. He's still at a full yellow bar right now.
Well, fair enough.
But it did definitely hit the dooms or the Styx.
I stand by what the strategy was, at least. As you can see, this room has gone very poorly, very quickly for me in terms of health. So,
okay, good thing you're going to get 50 back at the end, right?
Assuming I beat it.
On the edge of my seat.
Yeah, no, obviously I did beat the run this time, but that was my mindset in the moment, was like, I'm not thinking about how good 50 health is, because I don't get 50 health if I don't beat this. As you can see, the benefits that we've talked about with this weapon, we kind of saw a big one there. Like, while you were watching the fight, suddenly he has a satyr, right? Dire satyr or something like that. Suddenly he just wasn't on the screen for a while. And then when I went back to the side of the screen he should be on, oh my goodness, he's not there. What am I, a magician? Did I hack the game? No, it's what we've been talking about with how effective this weapon is from a distance. Something I've been meaning to bring up and I keep thinking about, and then we just transition in conversation, that I think is worth clarifying, again, for anybody who's watching this, checking out the Lucifer rail, just, a beginner player, getting into the game. One of my favorite things about the Lucifer rail, and not just the Lucifer rail, actually, I should say, about the rail in general, because it works for both Lucifer and the non-hidden aspects, is that when you use the special, if you just press it very fast, it auto-aims, much like many attacks do. It auto-aims to a enemy, right? It's not guaranteed that's the one you want, per se. But I did that a lot during this run. I didn't pay any attention to where I was doing it. I just shot the special and avoided attacks. And then when I got a moment to shoot again, I just shot it. I'm not aiming it at anything in particular a lot of the time. There's been times where I've specifically talked about how I am, like when I spread it out or when I put it in the center of a room. But in this fight, I'm basically just shooting it and dodging, shoot it whenever it's there to be shot, which can contribute to the fact that the satyr was just like off screen taking damage and dying. Also, as soon as these mini bosses in this fight, or Styx in general, don't have armor, it's a whole different fight. Which is why I took so much damage in the beginning, and it was like I'm on pace to lose this room and not win with how much damage I'm taking and how much damage I've given. But it becomes so much easier once they don't have armor.
Absolutely. And yeah, like you were saying with the auto aim, I do the exact same thing with the rail. I almost entirely rely on the auto aim, specifically with the special, just to hit something. With the attack, I'm a little more deliberate, but yeah, the special, it just goes where it's going to go.
Yeah, and I wanted to clarify that.
Especially if you're playing on a controller.
And for anybody who's curious, I do play exclusively on a controller. This is done on a Switch, which I guess you can tell by the pop-ups that prompt on the screen. Something I wanted to clarify here was, again, we saw how terribly that mini-boss room went for me in general. It didn't in the run, but it went, I think we can all agree, pretty poorly. So I still had 2 more rerolls. Not only did I get a reroll into a Centaur Heart, which is fantastic, I got it on my first attempt, so I still had 2 more in the bag. That's why I specifically target Zeus here. It doesn't work out. It just rerolls into 2 more gods. But that was the mindset, was, you know, maybe that one could be money or a heart as well. And then I just go to the fallback of going for the room that doesn't have a boon.
Well, fingers crossed for a 3-sack.
Wayfire, you love when it takes as many routes as possible for me, right? You were all aboard the Gilgamesh run.
I'm just rooting for you to get an Olympian free run, that's all.
I've even talked about it in...
On your side, QB.
Like I said, I like the weapons like the Zeus Shield and this one that can do their stationary damage. I think in my previous runs, I've used a lot of like flurry attacks. I think I did that with the spear and the bow.
Yes.
So like you could tell that I like the hit stunning and the like consecutive fast attacks, which makes sense with the pack that I'm doing. But I've talked about this enemy here specifically being problemsome. Is that a word? It can be a word for me at times. But this weapon kind of just negates it, which is fantastic. And it negates it a little more in a way. And again, I was talking about how this is similar to the Zeus Shield, but different. And another one of the differences is the auto aim we were just talking about. This isn't a big room, so it's not really a factor. I'm sure with the Zeus Shield, I could have got it. But with the Zeus Shield, you have to aim that, right? And specifically because it goes a set length when it's going to stop in place. Like if you just want to hit it while it's moving and it's going to do enough damage to defeat an enemy, that's something different. But if you want to get it to lock into a spot and continue to hit an enemy, you have to put some effort into that throw, right? And with this, you don't. So this enemy, who's normally problematic for me, we are watching beautifully explode in a still here. And then I beautifully pause. I just notice, this isn't significant at all, but whenever I take my little breaks, I always seem to have Zagreus behind some wall or pillar or something. He's a little shy. I think judging by this game...
Sometimes you just don't want to be perceived, you know?
I think judging by this game, he's not shy whatsoever, but... my Zagreus is different than yours. My Zagreus is a little shy.
Just a little shy guy?
Oh my... He's got the color scheme.
Guest star in Mario?
He's got the color scheme.
Yeah?
So, although I knew there was an exactly... You can't argue any more or any less. Exactly 0% chance of it happening. I always wanted Zagreus to be a DLC in Smash Bros. Then he can hang out with Mario and Shy Guys.
Yeah, I mean, you're not the only person who... But I mean, people do that for all sorts of characters. They're like, you know, insert character for Smash.
Yeah, I mean, that was just super common.
It would have been fun.
And for anybody who didn't know, who like got on the Hades train late or like just played it on a different console or whatever, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it either came out for Steam and Switch or it came out for Switch exclusively first.
So how that worked is the 1.0 release was released exclusively on Switch as a console. It was released on Steam at the same, like the 1.0 release was on Steam at the same time as it was on Switch, but it was on Steam before that in early access, and Epic Games even before that at the start of early access.
Okay, yeah, because I know.
But yes, it was exclusive to Switch for like a year, I think, and then it came to Xbox and PlayStation.
Yeah, so the copy of the game that I have here is for the Switch, and it's for the Switch because, well, friend of the channel, BAM, bought it for me. I always love to give him credit for that because he thought I would like this. Bastion is my favorite single-player game of all time, so I'm not saying he's a genius for coming to that conclusion, but, you know, shout-outs to him for it anyway. But yeah, as soon as this game came out and he played it, he's like, all right, you know, QB's going to love this. So he wanted to get me a copy because he was like, you should play it. And I was like, I don't really feel like buying a new game at the moment. He's like, no, you should play it. And so he bought it for me just so that I played it because he thought I would love it. But point being, as soon as it came out 1.0, as Wayfire was saying, he wanted to get it for me, and I prefer to play games on console as opposed to my PC. So that's why I have the Switch version. Is this relevant to the run?
I was wondering if you were going to buy that Blood or Not, and you did.
Yeah, I don't think there's any point to me having done that, but it was fun, you know. I got to cash out all the money I've earned so hard. I think this is.
I mean, you could have bought that palm.
I did showcase, for anybody who's curious, I did showcase on a different run in the series what that does. If you don't have a boon and you buy, well, I mean, preferably you wouldn't buy it. You would come across it as a room reward. But if you get a palm when you don't have a boon, it just gives you a chunk of change. And in this case specifically, with the pack that I have on and the cost of that one there, you lose money getting it. So it
Oh yeah, 100%.
costs like 540.
It
It
just
gives
would've
you
been
like
funny.
325 or something. Which, like I said, I think I did that on a different run. But yeah, the reason, something that I think is interesting, this doesn't have to do with this run, but I'm just curious what you think about this while we're on stream here together. Also, this run's went pretty quick relative to my other runs for this.
It is pretty quick.
But-
It's a lot less than like the 90 minutes that the one ended at.
For clarification, I would say pretty quick. Also, the in-game timer is not reliable, as we saw. I like to have Zagreus just hide behind pillars with the clock running. So even quick in regards to that as well. Because I think he stood for a very long time, waiting for the heroes too. Although that might have been on a pause screen. But what I was gonna say, excuse me, and I'll let it rock for him to at least get in the ball stream. I do think it's interesting that, from my perspective, Titan Blood becomes the first resource to be useless in this game when you're playing through regular, not to really crazy challenges like this, because it doesn't really have. I don't know. For me specifically, it was the first one that like it no longer served any purpose whatsoever, and like getting it was bad.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I won't say that it serves no purpose, but
Still chilly out
it stops becoming something that you're actively seeking out. There are still uses for it, like you can use it for trading. There's some cosmetic stuff that you need for it.
So, for clarification,
it's used for the badges, I think. I know diamonds are used for the badges. I think
I believe it is
blood
as well. Yeah, I was gonna say, for clarification, what Wi-Fi is referring to, I'm also including that in my it's now useless. Other than trading, I bought everything that could be bought from the contractor, so there's no use for Titan Blood there for me. And I think, if I remember correctly, although I don't have every badge, I have more than enough blood to get every badge that I could ever need. So it just genuinely, other than trading, does not have a single use for me. Which obviously the other items are going to get that way eventually too. Darkness is going to become the main resource for those badges that you don't have. But I just thought it was interesting that the one that, like, by the game scale, like if you look at the shop, what you have to give up to get the next highest thing, so on and so forth, actually ends up becoming the first one that you don't need, and you prefer to find gems in a run if you're farming for completionists. With that being said, have you ever fought Hades? He's kind of an interesting fight, right?
No, not once. Please tell me how it goes.
Yeah, so the thing is,
I've never once fought Hades.
yeah, no, so the thing is, he's actually the final boss of the game, right? And I'm gonna showcase that he's pretty chumply, you know? He's pretty easy to take out.
I will say that this particular quote unquote build is actually pretty good for this fight, just because it does do good damage. Not so much that it's your Hellfire is stationary. That doesn't really help you because Hades moves around a lot. But when it does hit, it's doing good damage. It's not like with some weapons where you might be doing, like, 50 damage or something. You're chunking out those triple digits.
So a couple things of note here, in regards to both what Wi-Fi said and just this fight in general. Firstly, we did have a 3-sack, and we're still gonna have a boonless run. That's exciting because we got the reroll. And I thought about that because I just did a cast a moment ago, which I don't think I had ever done in this run before right then. I need to stop doing things like that, right? For the bow, I could have potentially had a special list run. I could have put that in the title as well, but I did it once at the beginning pointlessly. And then for this one, I just had a cast there that I easily could have not did and had a castless run, which I guess isn't really that impressive, but, whatever makes me sound better. But the other thing I wanted to note was less health going in this fight. I had good max health, but that mini boss was so unfortunate for me that I didn't go into this fight with full health. I've gotten hit once, mind you, but I wasn't even close to full health.
Effectively, this might actually be the least health of any that I've seen you get into the Hades fight.
Yeah,
with.
effectively, yep. And then something else I wanted to say was, again, I love having Wi-Fi on because it makes for good conversation, specifically when we find different perspectives on things. And I think that the Hellfire being in place is particularly effective against Hades because he loves to stand still. Right? He moves around a lot, but when he's not moving around, he just stands still for extended periods of time. Like after he does attacks, or when he's thinking about things, or when he's throwing fireballs, he stands still, I feel like, a pretty darn lot. And my biggest problem, another thing that makes this Lucifer rail even better than like the Zagreus or the Zeus shield, for instance, is that, again, for the Zeus shield, I had to line it up. And I had Zach on with me for that stream, and we pointed out a lot that I would just throw the rail and it would like go past him. Like I didn't time the space of it perfect because it goes a set distance, and you don't have control over that distance. You can call it back, but it's not going to stop in place on the callback. But this one, the auto aim that we referenced earlier, will auto aim at Hades. Not all the time, but usually works out when you want it to. So both the damage output that Wi-Fi reference is fantastic, the auto aim is fantastic, and the fact that he, like he's doing right there, he just stands in place a lot. Or right there, he's not literally in place, but he's swinging at the stump.
Good shot there though. Trying to throw some slam dunks in the water.
Yeah, Wi-Fi is a big basketball player. For anybody who's curious. I do like when you throw all three perfectly like that. It looks like there's just one there. And again, for anybody who's curious, the strategy there was he's not on the screen, but I'm just going to preemptively put them in the middle of the screen, the most likely place that you could end up getting hit by them. But also in regards to what Wi-Fi said about my beautiful, wonderful, fantastic slam dunk, auto aim is not the single most reliable thing in the world. It's there and it's in the game. I don't even think of it messing up. I just think like there wasn't a clear enough path to him or he wasn't close enough. I don't know if that's true, but that's just how I reasoned it in my mind.
That's probably exactly what it was. Like if it doesn't have a good line on it, it's just going to go kind of whichever direction you're pointing the stick. Which,
with how good this build has become and with how frequently you can shoot them, I don't really get upset when that happens. Right? Well, I mean, I don't really get upset at much in Hades other than apparently Demeter summoned for Theseus. But yeah, I don't really get upset because I just understand that that's how it works. It makes sense. I was facing that direction. But yeah, for anybody who's curious,
getting witches as the Hades summon is actually a pretty good role. I will say.
Yeah, no, very much agree. For all the reasons that we went over for Theseus as well, other than like needing to go fast, but like having low health and their projectiles being slow and avoidable. It's just convenient. They don't resummon like the Elysium enemies do. They just don't have a lot going for them. And the thing is, I don't know if do I have another hot take? I don't know because I don't remember what the Asphodel ones are like. But I think the Elysium witches, I mean, you can't say that they're easier than the Tartarus ones because the Tartarus ones just do one single shot. But they're pretty darn easy, right? They're like I prefer how slow and big and obvious their attack is. It splits into little ones, but that's also just not problematic.
I prefer the Elysium ones, especially if you have Athena, because you can just deflect that entire big ball back at them, and then the witch is gone. There's no more witch.
The witch is gone. Are the Asphodel ones the ones that do the big spread pattern, like the fan out pattern?
No. Yes, you said Asphodel. Yeah. Yes, that's correct. Asphodel ones do the. It's like three lines.
It's like five.
So either the
armored.
Unarmored ones. Yeah.
The reason that I asked Wi-Fi that is just to point out that I think I was debating my hot take there. I think I would outright say that I prefer the Elysium ones over the Asphodel ones. I think they're just easier, regardless of build.
Yeah, I would agree.
Something else that I mentioned earlier, but is relevant to this fight, is Hades stands still a decent bit, as I was talking about earlier. He also attacks a lot, though, right? Even if you're not near him. Like, he just did a dash, I was nowhere near him, or he'll do his little attack that he's doing just now, where he summons 2 skulls and then does a dash attack. He does a spin, so on and so forth. Which is to say that I reference how if I shoot an extra one, I've talked about this a bunch, but if I shoot an extra one past 3 of my Hellfire on the screen, they explode, but they also explode if they attack, and like, Hades is always trying to do damage to me, which is ultimately making him do exactly that. What it just happened on the screen. He explodes them and just does extra damage to himself. And that is a beautiful off the backboard shot. Completely intentional. See, it set him up for where he ultimately
So that's what
got
happens
hit.
if you're too close to the pillar, for anybody who's never played before or isn't familiar with it. If you're too close to a pillar, the lobbed rail special will just bounce off of it like that right there. But if you're standing a little bit further back, it'll clear it.
And one interesting thing about the fact that it clears it is that the only attack that can do that can go over things in the whole game?
Over things, it's the only attack that behaves like that, yes.
Yeah, that's just another advantage.
Everything else will either be blocked by it or will just go through it. Just straight up through it. Like Well, basically any attack will go through it, um, except for like the rail attack. As long as it has the reach to reach something on the other side.
I'm not.
I guess the spear would probably stop
I
on
was
it.
gonna say I'm not certain. Are you talking like physically attacks? Because the first thing I thought of was the Zeus shield, which is just gonna bounce off it and come back to you.
I guess. So maybe not everything.
And I don't know.
There's obviously some exceptions.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if projectiles in general do, like the bow or the attack for this weapon. But physical attacks, I would imagine would, like the spear. I don't know.
I guess in my mind I was thinking more of like physical swing attacks kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fair. I know the magnetic cutter will also go through them. But that's neither here nor there. That was, again, for anybody who's curious, strategizing for something like this, that was not a good Achilles summon, because you want to do it when there's not skulls on the screen, because then I didn't get both hits on Hades. And although we're talking about how strong my build is, I've taken just a couple hits, but two of those couple, I don't know if it was literally 2 hits that I've taken or more, but at least 2 of those couple were his big swing. So I've taken 80 damage.
I mean, all you need to do is take a couple hits in the Hades fight to lose a bunch of health, because everything does a lot of damage.
Which is part of the reason I didn't go for hard labor. Well, not part of the reason, it's, you know, the reason.
Entire reason.
Things do more damage if you have hard labor. Isn't that crazy? So if you don't want to take more damage, you just avoid hard labor.
Hard labor and what's the other one? Height and security. Because you don't want the traps to be doing huge damage either.
Correct, yeah.
The pots.
Yep. But as you can see, Hades is telling me, QB, the person on the screen, that I have such strength. Which is appropriate, you know?
And look at that. Even though you had no boons, you still got the darkness commendation.
Yeah, I was going to point out the same thing. But look at the beautiful screen. No boons. Look, Mom, no boons.
So clean. So shiny.
An unseen cleaner, you could even say. Very clean.
You could say that. You're right.
Is it the best? Did it work perfectly? Maybe. You be the judge. But yeah, Wi-Fi, it's a pleasure having you. Do you have any? We talked a lot over the Hades fight about not necessarily the Hades fight. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything?
No, I thought you executed very well on that. Made good decisions throughout the run, and got overall pretty lucky with your RNG. So, yeah, well done.
Thank you. I kind of touched on it in general for the Lucifer rail, but yeah, I stand by what I said. The Lucifer rail is quite fun. And I've said before that like the rail is probably my least favorite weapon, but that wasn't necessarily like a currently I've analyzed all the weapons and I'm making that thoughtful decision. It was just like a throughout my experience, like my whole time from the beginning to the end playing, it was like which one was the one I didn't really want to come across, right? But yeah, after playing that, the Lucifer rail may have been the one that I was most looking forward to doing this specific like series, this video, this stream for, right? Because it's just so interesting. It has so much more to it, I feel like.
Yeah, no, it is a lot of fun, and for people who aren't familiar with the game, I always find they seem surprised when they have a laser gun show up in the hacky slashy game, so that's fun to experience too.
But I think I talked about it in the middle of the run because I'm a little different. I do what I want. But for anybody who's curious, Whitefire is a big time friend of the channel and also a streamer as well that I enjoy the content of. So, you know, if you think anything I said today at all during this entire video or stream was interesting or you agree with, then you should probably check out Whitefire, right? You should take my word as gospel and you should probably check out his channel. He streams every weekend at about 1 p.m. my time, which is Eastern time. And I think it's a good time. You can hear him and I disagree on all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, it's a good time.